Hey everyone, welcome back to the Growth Journey podcast, where we dive deep into all things self development, growth, and becoming the best version of ourselves. I'm Sarah, and sitting across from me is my partner in thought provoking discussions, Alex. Alex, how's it going today?
Hey, Sarah. I'm feeling great, thanks. It's always exciting to sit down with you and chat about topics that really push us to grow and reflect. I feel like every episode is a learning experience, even for us.
Absolutely. We're all on this journey together, and I love how we explore the twists and turns that life throws at us. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Here on The Growth Journey, we like to have open, honest conversations about everything from habits and mindset to challenges and breakthroughs.
And the idea is simple. We believe that growth is a lifelong process. It's not about reaching a destination, but about constantly evolving, learning, and getting just a little bit better every day.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into a topic that's really close to both of our hearts: self development. Whether it's in our personal lives, our careers, or just how we show up in the world, self development is key. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's get into it.
Podcast Segment 1: The Essence of Self-Development.
So, Alex, when we talk about self development, what does that actually mean to you? I feel like it's one of those buzzwords people throw around without always unpacking the full meaning.
Yeah, it's funny how the term self development can feel so broad and yet so personal at the same time. For me, self development is about continuously working on ourselves, mentally, emotionally, physically, and even spiritually. It's about recognizing that we're never finished products. There's always something we can improve on or a new way we can grow.
I love that. It's like we're constantly in progress, right? There's no final version of ourselves that we reach and then just stop. I think that's a powerful mindset to have, especially in a world that sometimes pushes us to think we need to be perfect.
Totally. It's the idea that perfection isn't the goal, growth is. And growth happens through small, consistent efforts, as well as the big, transformative moments. Sometimes it's as simple as reading a book, learning a new skill, or even just reflecting on an experience we've had. It's all part of the journey.
I think that's what makes self development so exciting and accessible too. It doesn't have to be this grand overhaul of your life all at once. It can be those small, intentional steps that build up over time. Like, I've been really focusing on mindfulness lately, just taking a few minutes every day to check in with myself. It's been game changing.
Mindfulness, huh? Tell me more about that. How has that been impacting your self development?
Podcast Segment 2: The Power of Mindfulness.
Yeah, so mindfulness for me has been about being present in the moment and paying attention to my thoughts and feelings without judgment. It sounds simple, but it's been helping me become more aware of the patterns I fall into, like negative self talk or stress that I don't even realize I'm carrying.
Now, that sounds amazing. Do you feel like it's changed how you approach challenges or even your day to day life?
Absolutely. I think before, I used to get swept up in everything, whether it was work stress or personal stuff, and I wouldn't even notice until I was completely drained. Now, with mindfulness, I can catch myself earlier and give myself that space to breathe. It's like I'm more in tune with myself, which has made me more intentional about how I spend my energy.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It's almost like giving yourself the gift of awareness, right? Because when you're aware, you can choose how to respond instead of just reacting. I think that's a huge part of self development, learning how to be in control of your inner world, even when the outer world feels chaotic.
Exactly. It's been a major shift for me. What about you, Alex? What's something you've been working on in your own self development lately?
Podcast Segment 3: Embracing Discomfort for Growth.
Well, one thing that's been a big focus for me lately is learning to get comfortable with discomfort. I think we all naturally try to avoid discomfort, whether it's physical, emotional, or even just the discomfort of uncertainty. But I've realized that so much of our growth happens when we're willing to step outside our comfort zones.
Yes, that's such a big one. It's like growth and discomfort are inseparable, right? How have you been practicing that?
Well, for me, it's been a mix of things. On a practical level, I've been setting goals that stretch me, like trying things I'm not naturally good at or tackling projects at work that feel intimidating. But it's also been about emotional discomfort, being vulnerable in my relationships, having tough conversations, or even just being honest with myself about where I need to improve.
Wow, that's so brave. It's not easy to lean into discomfort, especially when it's about emotional growth. Do you find that it gets easier the more you do it?
In some ways, yes. The more I practice embracing discomfort, the more I realize it's not something to fear. It's like building a muscle. The more you challenge it, the stronger it gets. And I've learned that the discomfort is temporary, but the growth that comes from it lasts. It's like the saying goes, the magic happens outside of your comfort zone.
That's so true. I think the fear of discomfort is often worse than the discomfort itself. Once you're in it, you realize you can handle it, and that's where the breakthroughs happen.
The importance of reflection.
You know, Alex, as we talk about all of this, I'm reminded of how important reflection is in the self development process. It's one thing to experience growth, but if we don't take the time to reflect on what we've learned, we can miss out on really understanding how far we've come.
That's such a great point. Reflection is like the glue that holds everything together. It's where we make sense of our experiences and extract the lessons that we can carry forward. I try to set aside time each week to just sit and reflect, whether it's through journaling, meditating, or even just having a quiet moment to think about what's been happening in my life.
Do you find that you gain new insights when you reflect, even if it's on something you thought you already understood?
All the time. It's amazing how much clarity comes from simply sitting with your thoughts. Sometimes I'll think I've figured something out, but when I reflect, I see it from a completely different angle. It's like uncovering layers of yourself you didn't even know were there.
That's so true. Reflection can really deepen our understanding of ourselves and our growth. I think it's also where gratitude comes in. When we reflect, we can appreciate the progress we've made, even if we still have a long way to go.
Gratitude is huge. It's easy to get caught up in what we haven't achieved yet. But when we take the time to reflect and be grateful for the growth we've experienced, it shifts our perspective. It makes the journey feel more rewarding, even when it's challenging.
The role of consistency in self-development.
Speaking of the journey, I think one thing we can't forget to talk about is consistency. Self development isn't a one time thing, right? It's about showing up day after day, even when it's hard.
Absolutely. Consistency is key. It's like anything in life, whether it's working out, learning a new skill, or developing a mindset. If we don't put in the regular effort, we won't see the results. But at the same time, I think we also have to be kind to ourselves and recognize that consistency doesn't mean perfection.
Yes, I think that's so important. Sometimes people get discouraged if they miss a day or if they slip up. But consistency is about the long game. It's about getting back on track and continuing to move forward, even if it's not in a straight line.
And that's where self compassion comes in. We have to give ourselves permission to be human and to have setbacks. What matters is that we keep going, that we don't let those setbacks define us.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection. And I think when we approach self development with that mindset, it becomes more sustainable and more enjoyable. It's not about striving for some unreachable ideal, but about embracing the process of becoming the best version of ourselves, one step at a time.
Embracing setbacks as part of growth.
We've talked about all the positives of self development, mindfulness, consistency, reflection, but we haven't really touched on the setbacks, the moments where growth feels like two steps forward, one step back. How do you handle setbacks when they happen?
That's such a great point, Sarah. I think setbacks are inevitable in any growth process, and they can be really frustrating. But I've learned to view them as part of the journey. not something separate from it. In a way, they're just as valuable as the moments when everything is going well. Setbacks force us to slow down, reevaluate, and sometimes pivot, which can lead to breakthroughs we didn't see coming.
That's a powerful way to look at it. It reminds me of a time when I was trying to build a new habit, journaling every day. I was doing great for a few weeks. Then I had this super busy week and completely fell off track. I felt like I'd failed. But in reflecting on it, I realized that missing a few days didn't erase the progress I'd made. The key was getting back to it without being too hard on myself.
Exactly. I've had similar experiences with learning new skills. There's this temptation to give up when things get tough, but setbacks can be an opportunity to reassess our approach. Maybe we need to adjust our expectations or break things down into smaller, more manageable goals.
Right. And sometimes setbacks teach us that the path isn't always linear. It's easy to look at others who seem to have it all figured out and forget that behind the scenes, they've probably faced their own setbacks too.
Yeah, no one's journey is without bumps. I think we have to normalize the idea that growth is messy. It's not this clean, straight line to success. And when we accept that, we become more resilient and more forgiving toward ourselves when things don't go as planned.
I love that. Growth is messy, and that's okay. It's part of what makes it real and meaningful. So, for anyone listening who's in the middle of a setback, just remember you're still growing, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment.
Building a support system for growth.
Speaking of setbacks and challenges, another thing that I think is crucial in self development is having a support system. It's easy to think that growth is something we do entirely on our own, but I really believe that having people in your corner, whether it's friends, family, mentors, or even a community, can make such a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Self development can feel like a solo journey, but we're not meant to do it all alone. Having people who can encourage you, hold you accountable, or even just listen when you're struggling can be incredibly powerful. I know for me, whenever I've been working through a challenge, having someone to talk to has helped me see things more clearly.
Same here. I think the right support system can really amplify your growth. But it's also about finding people who understand your journey and respect your goals. Not everyone is going to get what you're trying to do, and that's okay. It's about surrounding yourself with those who uplift you.
That's so true. It's important to be intentional about who you let into your inner circle. The people you spend time with can either support your growth or hold you back. I think we all have to ask ourselves, who in my life challenges me to be better, and who might be draining my energy?
Exactly. And it's not always easy to make those distinctions, especially when it comes to long term friendships or relationships. But as we grow, it's okay for our circles to evolve too. Sometimes we outgrow people, and that's a natural part of the self development journey.
It is. And when you find those people who are aligned with your growth, it's like having a team that's rooting for you. They celebrate your wins, they help you through your setbacks, and they hold you accountable when you need it.
Yes, and accountability is such a big part of it. I think having someone to check in with can really help keep you on track. It's like when you know someone's expecting you to follow through, you're more likely to stick with it.
The role of curiosity in self-development.
Alex, something that just popped into my mind is the role of curiosity in self development. I feel like curiosity is such an underrated trait when it comes to growth. What do you think?
Now, that's a great point, Sarah. Curiosity is so important because it drives us to explore, to learn, and to step outside of our comfort zones. When we're curious, we're more open to new ideas and perspectives, and we're willing to question our assumptions. I think it's one of the key ingredients to ongoing growth.
Exactly. Curiosity keeps us from getting stuck in one way of thinking or being. It encourages us to ask questions like, why do I think this way? Or, what can I learn from this situation? And when we approach life with curiosity, it opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah, and curiosity helps us stay adaptable too. The more curious we are, the more flexible we become, because we're willing to explore different options or ways of doing things. I think that's especially important in today's world, where things are constantly changing. Curiosity keeps us nimble.
I love that. Curiosity as a tool for adaptability. It's like being a lifelong student, always open to learning, even from the unexpected.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of self development. The more curious you are, the more you realize that growth isn't a chore, it's an adventure.
The intersection of self-development and purpose.
Before we wrap up, there's one more thing I'd love to touch on, and that's purpose. I think self development and purpose go hand in hand. When we're clear on our purpose, it gives our growth direction and meaning. What's your take on that?
Purpose is huge. I think it's what gives self development its why. Without a sense of purpose, growth can feel aimless. But when we have a purpose, whether it's in our careers, our relationships, or just how we want to show up in the world, our efforts towards self development become more intentional.
Exactly. I feel like when we know our purpose, it helps us prioritize where we want to grow. It's not about trying to improve everything all at once, but about focusing on the areas that align with our larger goals and values.
That's so true. And I think it also makes the hard work feel worth it. When you're growing towards something that matters to you, the setbacks, the discomfort, all of it feels like it's leading somewhere meaningful.
Yes, purpose gives the journey its heart. It's what keeps us going when things get tough, and it's what makes the progress feel deeply fulfilling.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening, if you're not sure what your purpose is yet, that's okay. Sometimes it takes time to uncover it, but even just being open to exploring it is part of the self development process.
Definitely. Purpose can evolve too. What's important is that we stay curious and open to discovering it as we grow. It's like a guiding light that may change shape over time, but continues to lead us forward.
The role of habits in self-development.
You know, Alex, we can't talk about self development without diving into the importance of habits. It's like if self development is the journey, then habits are the vehicle that gets us there. What's your take on the role of habits in growth?
Totally agree. Habits are everything when it comes to self development. They're the foundation that supports all the changes we want to make. It's easy to get inspired by big goals or ideas, but without solid habits, it's hard to sustain that momentum. Habits make growth automatic over time. They turn small, daily actions into long term success.
Yes. I love that idea of making growth automatic. Because let's be honest, motivation comes and goes, right? We can't always rely on feeling inspired to push us forward. But habits? Once they're in place, they carry us even on the days when we're not feeling super motivated.
Exactly. And the beauty of habits is that they compound over time. It's those little, consistent actions that may not seem like a big deal in the moment, but over the course of months or years, they create massive results. Whether it's exercising, meditating, journaling, or even learning something new every day, these habits build the structure for growth.
Right. And I think the key is to start small. So many people get overwhelmed by the idea of overhauling their lives all at once. But really, it's about implementing tiny, manageable habits that stick. Like, for me, I started with just 5 minutes of journaling every morning. It seemed so easy that it didn't feel like a chore. And now, it's a non negotiable part of my routine.
Exactly. Small steps lead to big changes. I think people underestimate the power of small habits because they're looking for immediate results. But self development is a long game. The habits you build today are setting the stage for the person you'll be in the future.
That's such a good point. Habits are like seeds. They take time to grow, but once they do, they're rooted deep and become a part of who you are. It's like the saying, we are what we repeatedly do. And that's where real transformation happens through consistent habits.
Absolutely. And I think the process of building habits teaches us so much about ourselves, too. It teaches discipline, patience, and resilience. Plus, it gives us a sense of control over our growth, which can be really empowering.
Self-compassion as a key to growth.
One thing I've been reflecting on a lot lately, especially when it comes to habits and consistency, is the idea of self compassion. Sometimes we can be so hard on ourselves when we don't live up to our expectations or when we slip up on our goals. What role do you think self compassion plays in self development, Alex?
Self compassion is huge. I think it's often overlooked in conversations about growth, but it's such an important part of the process. Growth isn't a straight line, and there will be times when we fall short, make mistakes, or face setbacks. Without self compassion, it's easy to get stuck in a cycle of self criticism and guilt, which can actually hinder our progress.
Exactly. I've been there, beating myself up for not doing enough, not being productive enough, or not sticking perfectly to my habits. But the more I've embraced self compassion, the more I've realized that growth isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when things don't go as planned, and being kind to myself in the process.
No, that's so true. And I think when we approach self development from a place of self compassion, it becomes a lot more sustainable. Instead of pushing ourselves relentlessly, we're able to pause, reflect, and recalibrate without feeling like we've failed. It's like giving ourselves permission to be human while still striving for growth.
Exactly. I think self compassion is what allows us to keep going, even when things get tough. It's like having an internal coach who's cheering us on instead of a critic who's constantly pointing out our flaws.
Yeah, and it also creates space for more authentic growth. When we're compassionate with ourselves, we're more likely to take risks, try new things, and step out of our comfort zones because we're not afraid of messing up. We know that even if we fall, we can get back up again.
I love that. It's like creating a safety net for yourself, where you can grow without fear of judgment. And I think that's where real transformation happens. Not in trying to be perfect, but in being willing to be imperfect and still move forward.
The importance of rest and recovery in growth.
You know, Alex, something we don't talk about enough in the self development space is the importance of rest and recovery. We're always focusing on the hustle, the grind, the growth. But what about taking breaks? How do you view rest when it comes to self development?
I'm so glad you brought this up, Sarah. Rest is such a crucial part of growth, but it's often the most neglected. We live in a culture that glorifies productivity, and sometimes it feels like taking a break is a sign of weakness or laziness. But in reality, rest is where the magic happens. It's where we recharge, reflect, and process everything we've been working on.
Exactly. I think rest is an essential part of the growth cycle. Just like muscles need time to recover after a workout, our minds and spirits need time to rest in order to continue growing. It's not about doing less, it's about giving ourselves the space to come back stronger.
Yes, and rest doesn't just mean sleeping or taking a day off. It can also mean giving yourself mental rest, like stepping away from work, social media, or even the pressure to constantly be improving. Sometimes we need to just be without the constant striving.
That's such a great point. Mental rest is just as important as physical rest. I know for me, I've had moments where I've been so focused on personal growth that I forgot to slow down and just breathe. But when I do take time to rest, I find that I come back with a clearer mind, more creativity, and a renewed sense of motivation.
Exactly. Rest isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And I think when we give ourselves permission to rest, we actually enhance our growth. It's about finding that balance between effort and recovery so we don't burn out.
Totally. Rest is like the fuel for the next phase of growth. So, for anyone listening, if you're feeling tired or overwhelmed, know that it's okay to take a step back. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is rest.
The role of failure in self-development.
Alex, I think we should talk about something that a lot of people are afraid to face in their self development journey: failure. It's one of those things we try to avoid, but I've found that failure can be one of the greatest teachers. What's your experience with failure and growth?
That's such an important topic. I think failure is inevitable, and the way we respond to it can make or break our growth. For me, failure has been a constant companion in my self development journey. And while it's never fun in the moment, I've learned that failure isn't the end. It's just feedback. It shows us where we need to adjust, where we can improve, and what we can learn.
Yes, failure is feedback. That's such a powerful way to look at it. I think so many people are afraid of failing because they see it as a reflection of their worth or abilities. But really, failure is just part of the process. It's how we grow.
Exactly. And I think once we shift our mindset to view failure as a learning opportunity, it loses its power to hold us back. Every successful person has failed at some point. It's how they've learned and evolved. In fact, some of the biggest breakthroughs in my life have come from moments of failure.
Same here. I used to be so afraid of failing that I wouldn't even try new things. But the more I embraced failure as a natural part of growth, the more willing I became to take risks and step out of my comfort zone. And that's where real progress happens.
Definitely. Failure isn't something to avoid, it's something to embrace. It's like a signpost on the road to success. Every time we fail, we're one step closer to figuring out what works.
Exactly. So, for anyone listening who's afraid of failing, just remember, failure doesn't define you. It's simply part of the journey. Learn from it, grow from it, and keep moving forward.
Overcoming procrastination in self-development.
You know, Alex, there's another topic that I think a lot of people struggle with when it comes to self development: procrastination. It's like this invisible barrier that holds us back from taking action, even when we know what we should be doing. What are your thoughts on overcoming procrastination?
Oh, procrastination. I think we've all been there. It's such a common hurdle, and it's so easy to fall into the trap of putting things off, especially when the task ahead feels overwhelming. For me, overcoming procrastination comes down to breaking things into smaller, more manageable steps. The more daunting the task seems, the more likely we are to avoid it. But if we break it down into bite sized actions, it feels less intimidating.
Yes, that's such a good strategy. I've noticed that when I'm procrastinating, it's often because I'm overwhelmed by the big picture. But once I focus on just starting, even if it's something small, I build momentum. It's like that quote: "You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step."
Exactly. And that first step is often the hardest. But once you get started, it's so much easier to keep going. I also think it helps to create a structure or routine around what you're trying to accomplish. When you schedule time for your goals, it becomes part of your day, and you're less likely to put it off.
Right. And sometimes I've found that procrastination isn't just about avoiding the task itself. It can also be about fear: fear of failing, fear of not doing something perfectly, or even fear of success and the changes it might bring. When we address those underlying fears, it becomes easier to take action.
That's a great point, Sarah. I think self awareness is key here. When we understand why we're procrastinating, we can work through it instead of just feeling stuck. And like you said, often it's not about laziness, it's about something deeper, like fear or perfectionism.
Exactly. So, for anyone listening who's struggling with procrastination, maybe take a moment to reflect on why you're avoiding certain tasks. And then break it down into small steps. Set a timer for just 5 or 10 minutes and get started. It's amazing how much progress you can make once you begin.
Yes! Progress over perfection. Just getting started is a win. Once the ball is rolling, it's much easier to keep it moving.
Celebrating small wins in the self-development journey.
You know what we haven't talked about yet? The importance of celebrating small wins. I feel like we're often so focused on the big goals that we forget to acknowledge the little victories along the way. What are your thoughts on this, Alex?
Totally. Celebrating small wins is so important. It's easy to overlook the small steps we're taking, but those small steps are what lead to the big results. Acknowledging those wins keeps us motivated and reminds us that we're making progress, even if it's not immediately obvious.
Exactly. I think it's all about shifting our mindset to focus on progress instead of perfection. We tend to downplay our achievements because they seem minor in the moment, but they're part of the bigger picture. It's like if you worked out for 10 minutes today, that's a win. If you journaled for 5 minutes, that's progress.
Yes, and celebrating those wins also builds momentum. It reinforces the habit of taking action. When we recognize that our efforts are paying off, even in small ways, it encourages us to keep going. Plus, it feels good to celebrate. It makes the process more enjoyable.
So true. And it doesn't have to be anything extravagant. Sometimes I'll just treat myself to a nice cup of tea or take a moment to reflect on how far I've come. It's about creating positive reinforcement for the actions we're taking.
I love that. It's about being kind to ourselves and recognizing that growth isn't just about the big milestones. It's about showing up consistently. Every small win is a step toward becoming the person we want to be.
Exactly. So, for anyone listening, don't wait until you've reached the finish line to celebrate. Take time to acknowledge the progress you're making right now, no matter how small it may seem. You're growing, and that's worth celebrating.
Staying inspired in the long term.
One thing I've been thinking about lately, Alex, is how to stay inspired over the long term. Self development isn't a short sprint, it's a marathon. There are times when we're super motivated and other times when we're just not feeling it. How do you keep that spark of inspiration alive?
That's such a good question. I think the key is to stay connected to why you're doing what you're doing. When you remember your bigger purpose or the deeper reason behind your goals, it helps reignite that fire. For me, it's about constantly revisiting my why, whether it's journaling about it, talking to a mentor, or just taking some quiet time to reflect on my values.
That makes so much sense. I think when we lose sight of the why, it's easy to lose motivation. I've noticed that when I reconnect with the impact I want to make or the person I'm striving to become, it helps me push through those days when I'm not feeling as inspired.
Exactly. And I think it's also about surrounding yourself with inspiration, whether it's books, podcasts, conversations with like minded people, or even just taking in nature, whatever fills your cup. Sometimes when we're feeling uninspired, it's a sign that we need to recharge and fill ourselves up with new ideas or energy.
Yes, I totally agree. I love reading books that inspire me or listening to podcasts that challenge my thinking. And I found that even just taking a walk outside can give me a fresh perspective. It's like we need to create space for inspiration to flow back in.
Exactly. And it's also important to be patient with ourselves during those times when we're not feeling super inspired. Growth isn't always about being in a constant state of motivation. There will be ebbs and flows, and that's okay. What matters is that we stay connected to the bigger picture and keep showing up.
Yes, it's about staying committed to the process, even when the motivation isn't at its peak. And like we've talked about before, habits can help carry us through those times. But also, taking a step back to recharge and find inspiration again is just as important.